This is Kira Snyder, and you're watching the TV Writer Podcast.
This is Gray, and I want to welcome you to the TV Writer Podcast, partner of Script Magazine, episode 136 for November 29th, 2022. Happens to be my 51st birthday as you're watching this podcast.
Happy birthday!
Thank you. And the voice that you're hearing here, she has won an Emmy, a Golden Globe, a PGA Award, and 2 WGA Awards. Her credits include not only great shows like Handmaid's Tale, The 100, and Eureka, but also the blockbuster feature film Pacific Rim Uprising. Welcome, Kira Snyder.
Thank you, Gray. Happy to be here.
Yep. And of course it is Thanksgiving week, and I want to give you a special thank you for the way that you gave your time speaking on panels, because that's actually how we met. You've spoken at a number of panels that we've been at over the years. And in particular, we always bring our daughter to these panels. We've been bringing her since she was 11 back in 2014, and she's now in her second year at USC studying to be a TV writer. So just thanks for being an inspiration to her.
Oh, fantastic. It was so lovely to meet your whole family, including your daughter, at Comic-Con this past year. And so thank you for this, and also for all the recording you do for those and other panels. Much appreciated. I really enjoy doing them. I mean, I find, for a number of reasons, I find it it's really fun to connect with writers, and I find when I'm asked to talk about process or story, it actually kind of helps me articulate for myself how I think about things and how I work on things. So I actually learn something when I talk with folks. But also mostly it's because I used to go to those kinds of things all the time when I was coming up, breaking in. We did have the internet when I was coming up, but nothing quite like we have now. So, there were not any podcasts by so many names. There were panels, but they were in person. And I would go to those as often as I could. I went to them at Comic-Con. I actually have been to, I don't know who had been Spiro's panel, but I definitely have been to TV writing panels at Comic-Con. And of course, here in Los Angeles, which, as you know, there's events all the time for screenings and panels and speakers and whatnot. I just got a lot out of them, and I found them really inspiring, and hearing how people's paths are so different and how they overcame adversity or got over self-doubt, or even just kind of tips or tricks for the page. And so I would go to those, and I really enjoy kind of trying to give back in that way.
Very, very cool. Much appreciated. And I do want to say a shout out to Spiro Skensos, because his panel, Intro to TV Writing from First Draft to Getting Staffed, is coming up this week at LA Comic-Con Sunday afternoon. I think it's at 12 to 1. But definitely you want to come to that. LA Comic-Con is one of the most inexpensive conventions to go to. It's right here in LA, easy to get to at the LA Convention Center. So I do highly recommend the viewers sign up for Comic-Con and attend his panel on Sunday. It's always awesome. And it's his birthday today, too.
Oh my gosh, you guys share a birthday? That's fantastic.
Yeah, we do.
I'll have to drop him a note. Yes, Spiro is fantastic. And talk about being generous with his time. He's put on those panels for many cons, and he moderates for the Guild all the time. So he's a rock star.
Yeah, very much so. So if you want to wish him a happy birthday, he's on Hive Social now, at Spiro is his address.
Okay.
There. Yep.
Thank you.
Now let's talk all about Kira Snyder, your backstory. Let's rewind way back, because you have 2 really interesting pieces in your backstory. One is that you grew up in a Navy family, and then you also were initially a video game designer. So talk about that, growing up in a Navy family. How did that lead to video game designing, and then that into writing?
Sure. So, so my dad is a retired Navy officer. He was a diesel submarine captain. Wow. In the through the 60s up through the early 80s. And so my sister and my mom and I and he were a little Navy family unit, and we moved around every year, a couple of years, as my sister and I were growing up. Lived all kinds of different places, obviously places next to water. I know sometimes there's naval installations inland, but we were on coast because that's where his boats were. And so he was a Navy officer. So I lived all over the world growing up. And my mom is an anthropologist by training. So kind of from both of them, I really got interested in, other worlds and civilizations and stories. And that interest kind of has been part of my background growing up. Also, something else that happens very often with military kids is kind of how you deal with moving schools so often, what kind of personality you develop by having to kind of relocate. And sometimes Navy kids or military kids are very extroverted, and they make friends really easily, and they just kind of slot right in from school to school. And that was more my sister's experience. And another way to go is you become more introverted. And I found books, I found mythology, and I really fell in love with reading at a very young age, and specifically like kind of the things that we now call genre stuff. So Arthurian legends and, as I said, mythology from around the world. And again, I picked that up from my folks in the places that we lived. And sort of also being in part of the military culture. Yeah, I was a gamer from way back, some of the earliest computer game systems. So that's something I just really have enjoyed doing my whole life. And it was when I was in had just graduated college. I was a drama major. I focused on playwriting. I was also playing at that time a lot of computer games. I was playing a lot of the text-based precursors to things we now know as EverQuest or Minecraft, things like that that were text-based. And I kind of fell in love with these early days multiplayer computer games. And I took this kind of left turn into technology after working in theater for a couple of years. And studied computer game design. I went to graduate school for that in New York, and that was kind of my first real professional career. I did that for a decade. I worked I worked at Electronic Arts. I worked at Microsoft. I worked at a couple of startups, including one startup that is doing did sort of screen-based virtual reality. So we see a lot now about the metaverse on Facebook. We were doing something very similar, screen-based, not goggles-based, back in the early 2000s. And then one of the other games I was working on was how I got into LA. So I was working for a company that moved my job down to LA. So I made the move with my job, which is a nice soft landing in Los Angeles if you have to make the move. Having the company.
Oh, that's the best way.
Best way to do it. Yeah. And I did not come to LA necessarily thinking I would try to move into writing. It just was kind of a confluence of events. So the games I was working on at that point, they actually were not the kind of cool narrative world building type games that I have enjoyed playing and working on. They were much more kind of casual. So that was one factor. And the other factor was one of the other games I worked on back in the Bay Area for Electronic Arts was an alternate reality game called Majestic. And this was a game that kind of broke the fourth wall of what a game in real life was. So the game would call you on your phone. You would get emails from characters. It was really fun to work on. It had this kind of cool X-Files kind of story. And it was episodic. We had a bit of a writing staff, and one of the other people, so I was the game designer and the lead writer on that. And one of the other writers on it is a woman who was on she was part of the original writing staffs of the first Beverly Hills 90210, Melrose Place. So she and her family had moved to the Bay Area, and so she was working with us on this project. And we had, I now know to call it a writer's room. So it was a room full of whiteboards, and that's where we kind of broke the episodes for this game and figured out the puzzles and the story. And I just really loved that mix. And then we'd go off and write our own individual pieces. So as I describe it, you can hear it's a lot like writing for TV, which is what my friend Amy, and we're still friends, told me. She said, this kind of writing, this mix of collaborative and independent creation is very much like working on a TV show. So should you happen to find yourself in Los Angeles, you might think about that. So I was like, because I really did enjoy it. So I started writing, just terrible specs, just awful episodic specs.
What kind of stuff were you speccing?
Oh, let's see. I probably specced an X-Files. Trying to get some of get those those bad first scripts out of the way. But I was still in the Bay Area, so it was only when that job that that moved me down to LA, and again I was not enjoying it as much as the more worldy narrative games, story-based games that I had been doing. And I was in LA, so I was able to go to the panels and screenings I was talking to you about, and that's when I decided to really focus on TV writing. So I applied again, I read a bunch more specs. I applied to the Warner Brothers Writers Workshop. I submitted a Cold Case and a Veronica Mars for that.
Oh wow!
And so I got into that, and that was my break. So I was in the program 2006 to 2007, and I got staffed on my first show coming out of that program. And so I got staffed, and I gave my boss at my company 2 weeks notice, and have been focused on TV writing and screenwriting ever since. Although I still do love interactive, and I've done some interactive things here and there. But that was my first big break, was the workshop.
Very cool. And was that Moonlight?
It was Moonlight, yeah. So that Moonlight was a 1-season show that aired from 2007 to 2008. And it was it was on CBS, and it was when CBS was kind of trying some new things. So it was a vampire detective show starring Alex O'Loughlin. And so that was, so again, it was my first TV show. I found it just super fun and fascinating, and a big learning curve, because I had transitioned over directly from technology, from working in tech. So I did, and I had been working in theater. I knew, I was a drama major. I knew about theater production, but I didn't know really kind of anything about TV production. So it was a kind of a fast learning curve. And that show.
And what was the room like, and compared to the room that you had kind of had in the video game?
Oh yeah, the video game room was very small. There was just 3 of us. There was me, my boss, and then this writer Amy that I mentioned. And then on Moonlight, the staff was a little bit bigger. It was not very big though, and it was great. It was a nice range of folks. I was definitely there was one other staff writer and myself, and some other writers at various levels. And I'm still actually very close with a number of the people that I met on that show. And that's kind of one of the great things about shows, that even if things are challenging, and that, not way above my pay grade, that was a challenging show. It was a bumpy year. That was the year of the writer's strike.
Right.
There was just some challenges with this particular show, which, the showrunners kind of, shielded the rest of us from. So I had a great time. I had a great time working on that. But I definitely know there was some challenges and difficulties apart from the writer's strike. But making those connections, even if a show is difficult, meeting a couple of 2 or 3 more great people out of it, that's a great outcome for a show, that even if the show is a challenge, is a great way to have you come away with this great connection.
Yeah, very cool. So, did you secure representation right away?
Kind of. So one of the very first things that I did when I moved to Los Angeles, and I definitely recommend people consider this in addition to listening to panels like yours and podcasts like this one, is I took a pilot writing class at UCLA Extension. Which is a great program. There's a number of great programs in town, but that one, it was in the evening. It wasn't super expensive, and it was taught by working writers. It still is taught by working writers. And so I wrote a pilot out of that class. Oh, and that's that class also. The other reason that was great about that class, I'm also friends and colleagues with people that I met in that class, and this was 15 years ago now. So it's finding your cohort, however you do it. I definitely recommend that, because it's, you guys kind of move up together as you go forth in your careers. So I wrote a pilot in that class, and I had a friend who was already in LA. She was kind of the only person I knew in the business in LA when I first moved here. And she, screenwriter, TV writer, director, and she has a manager, and said, do you have something that he might read? And I had written this pilot that I was, I had worked really hard on. I was really proud of. And so she gave the pilot to him, and he responded to it. And we had a meeting, and really, really hit it off. And he has been my manager ever since.
Wow. Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah. So, and that was before the workshop, actually. That was kind of right around the time that I got into the workshop. And then from there, he helped me get an agent. And that agent is still my agent, although these many years later.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Very cool. Yeah, that's not that common. I mean, especially both the manager and agent, to keep them the whole time is pretty cool.
Yeah. It's been a great experience. Kind of, they've really had my back and been great supporters, and really kind of got the kind of writing I like to do. Even if it isn't necessarily their own specific cup of tea, but they always kind of had a really good understanding of the things I like to work on and where I might be a good fit. So it's been great to be able to have that same team since the very beginning.
Very cool. So one of the toughest transitions is from the first to the second show. And you had the writer's strike right in the middle of that. Talk about landing that second gig. Was that Eureka?
Yes, that's right. The second gig was Eureka, and you're completely right. When I first moved here, actually there was one other person I knew in the business, but they were like a very senior person on a very successful show. So I did the thing where like, oh, so hey, can I buy you lunch? And kind of picked his brain a little bit. And he said as much. He's like, yeah, the hardest job to get in Hollywood is the first job, and the second hardest job to get is the second job. So you're completely right. So the writer's strike was something that complicated a lot of people's lives and careers in all kinds of ways when it happened. Ultimately, it was a good and valuable and important thing because it got us internet coverage, which is kind of where we're all working these days. But that happened during the first season of Moonlight, and ours was one of the few shows to kind of come back after the strike. A lot of shows just got straight up canceled. Yeah. We came back for it was I think it was the additional 4 episodes. It would have been a much more longer regular season. So we had a sort of a shorter season. And we got canceled. So I co-wrote the finale, which turned out to be the series finale, with the other staff writer. And we were in post-production on our episode. We were like in color timing, I think. And we were like looking at our phones, and we read in the trades. Like we read in the trades on our phones that we had gotten canceled. And we kind of almost immediately after the news broke, then the showrunners called us. But it was like, oh, okay. So I guess we'll finish working on this episode. And that's obviously hard news for the entire production, because it's not just the writers that are out of work. It's it's 100+ people that are out of work when the show gets canceled. But it happened late. It happened late in the year, in May. And and that's that was long ago, where back when staffing season, it's still a thing, but it was kind of more or less kind of the only main time of year in town for landing a TV job. Because if you weren't staffed coming into June or thereabouts, you probably were not going to be on, certainly not a broadcast show. And that's what happened. So it was way too late. I mean, everything was staffed up. No one was even meeting. Wow. And so then this was kind of a crossroads moment for me. It's like, well, do I go back to my boss at the game company and kind of ask for my job back, or do I kind of double down and bet on myself and really hustle and make use of this time and try to find the next thing? And that's what I did. So I'd been very careful with my money, and again, that's something that I think we're all aware of starting out. Is like it's the money you earn as a TV writer sort of on paper is good, but it's also intended to carry you through the lean time. So I was very, very, very frugally for some months. And I wrote a feature, and I wrote another pilot, and a couple other specs. And then my reps found out that Eureka, which was moving into its fourth season, was adding some new writers, and so they submitted me to that.
And they weren't on a regular season, were they? I mean, in terms of the time of year.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, so Eureka was on the Sci-Fi channel, so they were kind of off the normal routine. And now staffing is much more year round, but and at that time, you might get lucky if there was a cable show that was staffing kind of off cycle. Mostly it was just happening in the springtime on the broadcast shows. So that was my second job. But it was, and I didn't work for, maybe it was probably 6 or 7 months. But yeah, so then I met on that, and that's things kind of things were a lot less rocky after that point.
Very cool. So Eureka, 4th season. What was that? Had you seen the show before?
Yeah. So I was a fan of the show, and so I was like super excited to
So
get
were
a
we.
chance to work on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, thank you. It's such a great experience. It was a really great room. It was a really fun project. I'm a bit of a science nerd, so a show that was so science positive, and it was you could kind of do all kinds of things. Like I really, that it had a lighter tone, which kind of is a good fit for me personality wise. And the characters are just warm-hearted, and the whole small town thing was great. But yeah, so I was a fan of the show, and I will say, like, I've been very, very lucky in the jobs I've gotten to work on shows that I was either a fan of because they had been already on the air, or they were kind of like my favorite of the crop of pilots in any given particular year, and that is certainly the case with Eureka.
Very cool. So talk about because you really had only that one season coming into Eureka. What was the room like? Were you at the bottom, the base staff level, and you were on there for 2-3 seasons?
So I was on there for 2 seasons, but it was kind of over. It was over more years than that because of how they broke it up. Because they did like a season, 4.0 and 4.5 and that kind of thing. So it was. Yeah, they were getting the sci-fi was getting a little creative in terms of how seasons were defined. So it was two seasons, but it was something more like 3.5, or maybe even 4 years. Yeah, so the room was it was bigger. There were a lot more people on it, but it was it was a really well run show, and that is an advantage coming into a show a few years in, is that even if it had been little first year shows tend to be bumpy for all kinds of reasons, and this one, I mean, you would never certainly know it coming in when I did. It was just a well run machine. And it was just really fun, like just a real positive energy, really good people. Definitely one of those rooms where no a-holes policy in terms of staffing was in place. Yeah, and I think everyone on that show, again, I'm still friends with and in touch with many of the people that I work with, and went on to work with some of those same folks on subsequent shows.
Yeah. Well, you did quite a few shows with Bruce Miller, right?
Correct. Yeah. So Eureka was the first of those, and just a fun kind of anecdote about the kind of getting the meeting for that job that might be relevant to writers here. So the whole do you write an original pilot? Do you write an episodic spec? That's definitely a topic that gets debated a lot. I think you need both. One reason I strongly advocate, lots of reasons I strongly advocate writing an episodic spec, is you just don't quite know necessarily what a given showrunner is going to really respond to, and you might kind of get a little bit lucky, which is what I did. So my the sample that they read for me that got me the meeting on Eureka was my Dexter spec.
Oh wow.
Which doesn't seem to fit, right? I mean, like sci-fi dramedy and this like super dark, serial killer show. And I took I picked I made a really dark story. It was like a father and son, like a father and young son, like murder team. It was like super dark. But Bruce Miller really liked Dexter, so he was excited to read a Dexter. And then that got me the showrunner meeting that eventually led to my getting the job. But yeah, so we were worked with Bruce on Eureka for those seasons, and then he went on to run season 2 of Alphas, also for Sci-Fi. And he brought a few of us over with him. So on that show, about half the staff from season 1 was still there, and then a bunch of us came on with him when he joined. And then we kind of went our own separate ways for a while. And then we kind of happenstance ended up on the same show, run by somebody else, which was the first season of The 100. So Liz Craft and Sarah Fain were running that. Jason Rothenberg created it, and they had hired Bruce. And then I was meeting on the show, so they're like, oh, you must know Bruce Miller from the other book. I'm like, oh yeah, you know Bruce. Like, oh, we just hired Bruce. So we independently got put together by the fates. And then so I worked with him for several seasons on that, and then he went off to work on a couple things, including what turned out to be The Handmaid's Tale.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. Well, we skipped pretty quickly through that. Can you just speak to sort of going through those different rooms, were they all structured in a similar way? I imagine with Bruce sort of being that consistent person throughout those. And I know Liz Craft and Seraphine, they speak a lot about how they run the room on their podcast. But were there differences between, or they were roughly the same?
But yeah, they were different. That's something that I always find fascinating, kind of going from show to show, and you kind of you pick up, habits or tips or guidelines from the various shows you work on. Ideally, ultimately thinking about like, oh, how would I like my own show down the road to run that? And so the shows. I'm just thinking like Eureka and Alphas, and to a certain extent, The 100, because he was Bruce Miller was pretty senior on that show, of course. So he had a lot to do with kind of help developing the culture there. Subsequent to season 1. It's they were very. I would say they're very respectful. They tended to have a really good balance, gender-wise and ethnicity-wise, and that was very much by design. The showrunners that I've worked with, all of them have been really committed to having voices in the room that are not exactly like theirs, and kind of filling in places in their own experience, whether it might be gaps or holes or things like that. So, again, that's happily more common now than it was, but again, I was very fortunate to come into rooms that were more or less equal in terms of number of men and women, that had people of other ethnicities. It wasn't just me in a room full of white guys. It reflected the diversity of the shows that we were creating, and I think the shows were better for that. They had I would say a hierarchy. They had a representation of writers across the kind of across the ladder, if you will, from staff writer all the way up to co-EP and EP. A nice range of kind of everybody. And again, that's it was certainly on streaming shows. It's a lot less common these days just because of the way the money ball works out. So you might have a lot of people at the high end, and then not enough money to like fill in the middle. So you might have some staff writers and some senior people, but not a lot of the middle folks. And all the shows that I worked on coming up had the middle level, which I think is really important because that's how you train the next generation of upper level writers. But I mean, in every room's vibe is a little bit different. I think what I came to appreciate in them was kind of the alchemy of creating a good writing staff, like the kind of apart from the no a-holes policy, which is important, but the kind of skill sets and approaches, how people think about story, because you don't want like 5 or 10 of the same type of writer or storyteller. Different people are bringing different things to the table, so you definitely want and there's something I definitely keep in mind when I'm reading to staff myself. You want a reading and meeting to staff rather. You definitely want those idea machines, people that are like just pitching all kinds of ideas. Really verbal. They don't get too attached because they're just kind of really helping us get things on the board. But you also need people who are a little more kind of hang back. They might synthesize more. They might be like, oh, well, this thing this person said actually ties together this thing we were talking about earlier. Or they might be the good yes and person. That's kind of more my vibe. I'm not the quick pitching idea machine. I'm kind of like looking at the whole board, figuring out how to connect things, thinking about what other people are talking about, and maybe helping coming up with a solve if there's a problem or a bump. So all those shows had a nice range of those kinds of folks. I mean, I think I really appreciate, in the experience, looking back on it, the care that the showrunners took in kind of assembling that kind of staff. Again, not just different people with different types of life experiences, but different types of kind of like writing, writer's room superpowers. Yeah.
And all 3 of those shows shot in Canada, right?
Correct. Yeah. So Moonlight shot on the Warner Brothers lot in Los Angeles, and I did not realize at the time like kind of how rare that was. It's like, oh, this is how the way it always is, because our writer's room was on the lot. We shot on the lot, and post was also on the lot, so it was all right there. But none of the other shows I've worked on shot in Canada, Vancouver, and then Toronto for Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah, and so at what point were you able to start getting involved in coming to set, supervising set, and also being in post and other producing responsibilities?
Happily, right from the very beginning. And again, I really credit the showrunners that I worked with coming up. They all of them were really committed to the kind of the teaching hospital way of running a writing staff. And that's not every showrunner does that. Sometimes they just want to take care of it all themselves, or they might deputize one or two other upper levels to take those things on. But I have been fortunate enough to be on shows, and I really like this approach of getting writers at whatever level as involved as possible, as much as possible. So right from the very beginning on Moonlight, we were on set. We were in the pre-production meetings. I mean, the showrunners were kind of more driving those meetings, but we were in there and participating. As much as we, as we felt comfortable doing. And and again, that was great and very special. And I very much appreciate having that experience. As early on as I did, especially as I mentioned, since I was coming over from another industry and had a lot to learn very quickly. Being able to kind of just dive right in was quite a privilege of the showrunners to kind of let us meet myself and the other staff writer who co-wrote that episode, just kind of dive right in.
Yeah, that's not at all common for the initial staff level. Yeah. So at what point did you write Pacific Rim Uprising, and how did that come about? This is another example to me of you kind of just never know where a job is going to come from. So I was working, so this is after Alphas, but before The 100. I worked on a show for Starz called Incursion, which was created by Stephen DeKnight, who created and ran Spartacus and has gone on to do many, many great things. But at that point, he had done Spartacus, which was a massive hit for Starz, and this was going to be his follow-up to that for them. And it was a really cool military sci-fi show, so kind of like Halo meets Band of Brothers, that kind of thing. So I was working with him on that show, and it was a little bit like, so our experience with that show is something that was rare at that time and is happening more and more these days, where the scripts were written, we were down the road on terms of pre-production, things, the wheels were in motion, but the network decided to kind of pull the plug. So the show never saw the light of day. And who knows? I mean, they might, it might come back around at some point. But it was just a business reality, and they were not, they decided not to go forward with it. But I had a great experience working with Stephen. And so, cut to some years later, he really just kind of called me up and said, so I'm working on this movie for Legendary, and I'm putting together a writer's room to kind of work on the story that I've developed, and was wondering if you'd be interested. And I'm like, absolutely. Like, y'all just don't even tell me what it is. And it was this. It was the sequel to Pacific Rim. Oh, that's really interesting. I've never heard of a feature being written that way.
Yeah, so he approached it a lot like an episode of TV. I mean, that of course is his background as well. I mean, he's worked in features, of course, but he's TV trained like I am. And so the room he put together was, I guess there's about 6 or 7 of us all told, and it was about half and half TV writers and feature writers. And he had come up with kind of the skeleton of the movie. And then we took a couple weeks and worked with him basically to break the movie as if you would break an episode of TV.
That is really cool.
Yeah, and often, I mean, I've not done. There's some writers' rooms that get assembled for features that come pretty late in the process, and I arguably to greater and less success in working on the script, but doing it early makes a ton of sense. So part of it was also due to speed, because there was a kind of a hard production start date, so he needed to move very quickly. So he wanted, again, working with a writer's room lets you move a lot faster, I think, probably than working on your own sometimes. So coming out of that breaking experience, breaking the episode, breaking the movie, myself and another writer, Emily Carmichael, were hired to write the script with Stephen.
Very
then
cool.
it was this whirlwind of finishing the break, because we did get all the way through it with everybody in 2 weeks. Finish the break, powered out an outline, powered out a draft, and then that was a great experience. I mean, it was kind of a whirlwind. But again, having worked in TV, you learn how to write quickly, and you learn how to write in other people's voices, which was great for this, because it was this was Stephen's movie. He was one of the co-writers. He's going to direct it. It was in his voice, and that was something, because I'd worked in TV for a number of years at that point, and also to work with him specifically. It was just a really fun, easy, we would just have a really great kind of working rapport. And we actually co-wrote something together just last year, again, because it was such a great experience. So yeah, I mean, it was again, not a call I expected. I mean, it's kind of the easiest feature job I think I will ever get.
Yeah.
But it really came out of having had this really great working experience on a completely other project.
Wow. Very, very cool. And so you joined the 100 on its first season. How long were you there before leaving for Handmaid's Tale?
I was there for 3 seasons.
Then
I got the call from Bruce asking if I'd be interested in meeting with MGM to work on Handmaids. I've worked on a number of shows from the very beginning, and it really is kind of, as I say, it can be bumpy in the first season, but it's really kind of special. Like I very much appreciated coming in partway through Eureka for the reasons I mentioned. Alphas was again a really fun show to work on the second season. But to be a part of a crew, cast, crew, writers, post team from the very beginning, that's kind of a special thing. And yeah, it was really fun, because those first 3 seasons, if you watch the show, the kids on the show, everybody in the show goes through like these massive changes.
Oh yeah.
And it was really kind of fun to dig into that. Like I like those kinds of survival stories. I keep finding myself drawn to dystopias for some reason, even though I'm not particularly dystopian in my own personal mindset. But that kind of like, what would I do? What would you do? Kind of those kinds of questions that come up when you're telling those kinds of stories. I just find really compelling, and I'm obsessed with urban exploration and ruins, and what the Earth looks like when people haven't been there for a long time. So that stuff was like super fun, finding buried, the Lincoln Monument half buried in the forest, in the rainforest, Vancouver. Was super, super fun. And then seeing the actors kind of really grow and develop into their roles was fantastic. That was again a great show to work on. And that again is another show the whole time, from the original showrunners to Jason, who took on later, involved in every step of the process, which was fantastic. So all the writers got to produce their own episodes,
Very cool.
which again is just incredibly invaluable experience.
And I happen to know a lot of the writers on that show, and it seemed like it was. I only hear positive things about the experience.
Yeah, it was really fun. I mean, it was kind of a different thing for the CW, and they really, CW really, and Warner Bros. They really supported us. I mean, we did some dark things, certainly not, I mean, even for broadcast, and this was like a broadcast show. It was not like, some of the streaming things. I mean, some of those early episodes where you realize, oh, this is the show. Like, they let us kind of explore this gray morality with these young teens, and there's just all kinds of fun things there, like all these the ruined cities, and got to work with a language developer, because there was a certain language that the grounders spoke, and that was just learning a lot of different things. It was also a show that because the budget was not big, I really came to understand and appreciate the invention and the storytelling that the production team can do when they actually are very limited. So a lot of the look of the show, the very kind of signature look of the show, was partially because we just didn't have a ton of time or money. Like a lot of it was shot handheld.
Yeah, it's fascinating because you wouldn't know watching that show. It was a really beautiful show to watch.
Thank you. Yeah, I really credit the production and the post team for it. And yeah, I mean, the money was spent wisely. The money that we had was up there on the screen, but the choices they made in terms of costuming and the cameras we used were within the limits of what the show could do physically. But I think it really added a lot to the kind of unique look of the show. Like it had a kind of a gritty look to it that at the time was different than a lot of the other CW shows.
Yeah, very, very cool. So Handmaid's Tale. Were you familiar with the source material? Were you involved in developing that with Bruce?
So I was familiar with the source material. I had read the book. Probably not quite when it came out. I think I probably read it in college. But actually, I had happened to just read it right before I got the call from him about possibly working on it, because my husband and I had seen a really incredible adaptation of 1984 at a theater here in Los Angeles. And that, of course, is one of the touchstones for Margaret Atwood's amazing novel. So I had saw the play, and I reread 1984, which I hadn't read in a while, and I reread The Handmaid's Tale. And then I got the call from Bruce saying, "Hey, so I'm been working on this. Do you want to come in and meet?" Because I still had to meet. I mean, it was definitely not an assured thing. So I went in to meet with MGM and him on the show. And so anyway, so the book was very, very fresh in my mind because I had just finished reading it. So I probably came off like a bit of a super fan, which I am. But it was helpful to have that kind of very, very fresh, the refresher on the book kind of right there at the tip of my tongue. And the other thing I wanted to mention about kind of that whole experience is before I got that call, I was kind of looking at the things I've been working on, and premium and premium cable and streaming was really starting to take off. And I love genre, but I also wanted to be considered for those kinds of shows. I wanted to be considered for kind of more prestige shows for cable and for streaming. And so basically I wrote a sample of that kind of show. So I had samples of other kinds, but I wrote this original pilot, which was intended to be a prestige kind of drama. And that was what MGM read that got me the meeting, and that is still a sample that I use today. So I just use it as an example of if you have been in a lane for a part of your career, and you want to be in a different lane, or you want to expand, we as writers, this, we have the opportunity to just generate new material, ideally to kind of move us into the different lane or to expand how people think about us. So that was something that definitely worked out for me. Yeah,
very cool. Yeah, and I can see that. I mean, there's a lot of great sci-fi shows, but you can become known for just that. So good for you to take that approach. Yeah. So Handmaid's Tale, you're there with Bruce. Were you involved in developing the show with him?
Not the first episode. No, I mean the first episode was very much out of his own brain, and he also did the second episode. So I was So I was there with the rest of the staff for the rest of the first season. So we helped develop the whole rest of that season, and the adaptation of the book for the show was really interesting year over year, because if you remember the book, the first season of the show largely follows the events of the book. Like some things are in different order, some things are definitely pulled up, some things are pushed back, but it's basically the book. So trying to figure out how best to kind of portion those important story elements out. What do we leave in? What do we not have space for? What are some of the secondary storylines and secondary characters that we want to follow? Like that was a really fun, interesting exercise, because the part of the genius of Margaret Atwood's novel is that it's actually not a very long book at all. It's a very slender volume, and you are in Offred's point of view the entire time. You're sort of in this bonnet cam point of view the whole time. But the world that Margaret Atwood has created in the book is so much bigger than beyond the bonnet. That's something that we actually are able to do in TV. Is kind of like go out and sort of follow other characters, dive more into the past, dramatize some of the transitional things like how Gilead came about, which you see a lot in flashbacks in the first season. And then that, of course, was very different in the second season, because we still had the book, but we didn't have necessarily the major events of the book, although there are some events and characters even, like June's mother, an event like the mass wedding, that are in the book. We just didn't have space for them in season 1. So season 2 was kind of picking up that story of her, in this case of June's pregnancy, and then kind of telling that story, and then finding opportunities where appropriate to like bring in some of the material from the novel that we just didn't get to in the first season. And we were actually able to mine the book. I mean, they're still mining the book, which is kind of fantastic. I mean, again, that just really speaks to the brilliance of the novel, is that you can, we've mined it every season since.
Very cool, very cool. And now you were coming in at a higher level now. Were you already a number 2 at that point, or what was your role beginning on it, and then obviously you moved up to the EP level while you were there?
Yeah. So I started off as a supervising producer, and then kind of moved up to co-EP, and then up to EP over the course of I was on the show for 4 seasons, the first 4 seasons. So I think I was actually not the number 2. That would be an amazing writer and human being named Eric Tuckman, who had also worked with Bruce on some other shows. But I was part of the kind of the cadre of upper level people that were kind of lieutenants to Bruce. So we were the people that were helping other writers. We would read earlier drafts from younger writers, offer the first set of notes to get it ready to give to Bruce. We would feedback on casting and post and all kinds of. One of the things that definitely picked up from him and some other showrunners is how important delegation is once you get up to the showrunner. Once you're sitting in the big chair, it's like there's so much work. The best way to survive is to surround yourself with people that you trust and delegate to them. So that's something he absolutely did. And then of course running the room, which actually I had been doing for a while as I've kind of moved up, because very often on a show, if the room is split or some people are out of the room because they're working on things, whoever is this most senior person typically will be running the room, or someone might just get anointed by the showrunners. They're like, whatever. No, Gray, you have the con. Yeah. So I definitely had experience, prior to becoming the EP about running the room, and that's his own kind of skill set. And I definitely learned by watching, other writers who are talented and wonderful and experienced, kind of picking up good habits from them. But it was really, but being part of that little kind of group of lieutenants was fantastic, because we all were able to kind of, backstop each other and, work with and mentor the other writers on staff, and ideally, trying to relieve some of the workload from Bruce.
Well, and talk about this. So, I mean, this was a prestige show now, but it won many awards, and you personally wrote episodes that were nominated or won awards. Talk about what that meant for you.
It was great and definitely surreal. I mean, certainly for the first season of the show, which was the one that got, as you mentioned, like we were so gratified by the response to the show, and it got a ton of recognition, which we're really, really pleased by. I mean, we did not necessarily we didn't know that was going to happen. Yeah. We were just trying to make a good show, and we were making it a little bit in a vacuum or a bubble, because you're just working on the show. It's not out there, no one's talking about it. You're just trying to make the best show you can. Which is ideally the way to do it. Like, it's a little easy to get kind of distracted once you're kind of out there and people are talking about it, but you can only work on the first season once. So every show kind of goes through this. But yeah, so we were working on it in 2016. We were working on it even before the primaries. And we did not quite know what environment the show would be coming out in, but like a lot of people, we thought it would be different than it was. We thought we would have a different president coming out of 2016, and that the show would be this kind of like, oh, ha ha ha, what a cautionary tale, that could never happen here, oh, that's ridiculous. And oh my gosh, we only wish that we had been less relevant than we ended up being, because we came out, as in a much different political moment than certainly I expected. And then suddenly we were extremely relevant and terrifying and timely, and then all these, again, quite accidental, coincidental parallels started happening. Like things would be on the show and they would be kind of happening in real life. And it's like, it was just,
Wow.
that was just crazy. And again, completely unintentional, because that, things were written and shot long before the events actually happened in real life. It just happened to be something very much in the zeitgeist about it. So that was a very surreal, amazing, rewarding, weird kind of award season coming out of that. But yeah, I mean, it was, incredibly honored by the response to the show and to the episodes that you mentioned. Yeah, I mean, it was not something we looked for, but was kind of fantastic to have been involved with something. And I'm very grateful to kind of the doors it's opened for me, and who have been involved with something that is, it's really saying something, but in a way that is still, we hope, kind of entertaining and emotionally compelling. It's not just a message show. It's something that is, as I mentioned before, like sadly a little too relevant still now, in the way that the book has always been relevant. The book was written in the 80s, but it's kind of always, unfortunately, been a bit timeless. And kind of here we are again, as we see now with recent Supreme Court decisions and lawmaking bodies doing terrible things to human bodies in terms of their legislation. So it's just, the cycle just keeps on turning.
Yeah, but I think one of the reasons I wanted to get involved in this industry in the first place is I really believe that the work we do has the power to influence people's minds. I mean, I was just saying the anniversary of the first interracial kiss. Back in Star Trek in 1967 or 68, whenever it was. And I had the pleasure of being in a film with Nichelle Nichols. And
oh, wow.
It's amazing in today's culture to think that was even a thing. But yet it wasn't so long ago. And it was really introduced to people on TV, and then gradually became a part of what they would accept.
Absolutely. I mean, that's such a great example, and I completely agree. I mean, it's, popular culture has the potential to really change minds and hearts in a real way. I mean, there's lots of issues that kind of point to that. Your real issues out in the world that were supported or explored or even just brought into people's homes for the first time through storytelling. So yeah, I mean, it's I agree. I mean, the other thing for me for that show, and then just kind of thinking about things I'm working on in the past and now, just being mindful about like kind of the stories and the messages that we're putting out into the world, because it can have an impact. It kind of does have an impact, and that's something that I think every writer kind of thinks about when they take on a project, like, why am I telling the story? Is the story something that I should be telling? What is the importance of it? Or what is the danger of it? I just find myself again, like, thinking about my own worldview. Again, I try to be more optimistic, although the world makes it hard sometimes to keep that. But yeah, thinking about the kind of stories that I'm putting out into the world, and that is a bit of a driver in the kind of things that I like to get involved with.
Very, very cool. Now, you currently have an overall deal at HBO. How did that come about? Was that, were the awards you won at all involved in that, or did that come out of The Handmaid's Tale?
Yeah, I mean, I think indirectly, well, certainly, yeah, The Handmaid's Tale and your reaction to it, and kind of just people being a little bit more aware of of my work and the work of other people on the show, and I think it's true with any show that kind of breaks out. Like those people suddenly are like, oh, people are paying attention to you all of a sudden.
Yeah.
So I think that certainly was a factor. So that came about because there was a show that J.J. Abrams had created and was developing for HBO called Demimonde, and they were looking for showrunner level people to work with J.J. to build that show out into its first season, and then to run it with him. And it was that project that I was meeting on, interviewing with, and so the overall deal came out of getting hired to work on that show with JJ, which is very common. I think my reps called it a show overall deal, where it's an overall deal, but really you're focused on this one particular show. In addition to developing projects to take to HBO. But with a show like this, when you're like, it's your full-time job, it's kind of that's your main focus. So that's how it came about, and that happened. So I kind of came off of season 4 of Handmaids and then onto this new show, basically right at the very beginning of the pandemic. And that was also, at least for me, that was a kind of a switch that was kind of for my own my own mental health was good, because again, as much as I love Handmaids, and I'm so grateful to the show and the people on the show for the opportunities that have come out of it. It was a hard space to kind of live in, especially in springtime of 2020 into summer of 2020, which we all know was like a challenging time for lots of reasons. And this other show was definitely had like scope and stakes, and it wasn't all sweetness and light, but it was not a dystopia. So I decided to take a break from dystopias for a while. I might end up back there, who knows, in some dystopia or other. Can't stay away from those dystopias, but it's a different world to explore, and it as part of it was this overall deal, which was terribly exciting. So that's the show Demimonde was kind of like that show I mentioned with the Stephen DeKnight show, that for Stars, HBO decided to not go forward with it, and that was in June of this year, 2022.
Wow.
So yeah, that was again another business decision, a casualty of the Warner Brothers Discovery merger, like a number of
so
other
many
things.
casualties.
So many casualties, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It's so never say never. It's a show that might find a home sometime, somewhere down the road. But the significant silver lining for me is that I still have this great relationship with HBO. I still have my deal with them. So that's what I've been doing now. So I have, in addition to developing things to take to them, I've been consulting on a couple of projects, which has been actually a fun kind of new role for me. I haven't really done that before, and I'm really enjoying it.
Very, very cool. We're going to take a quick sponsor break and then be back to talk about tips, and tips. DrivingFootage.com provides 360-degree driving plates for film and TV. Over 14,000 clips are available for locations all around Southern California, with over 100 new cities from the U.S. and Canada coming in 2023. A fully equipped camera car with height-adjustable rig is available for custom shoots. Visit DrivingFootage.com for details. And we're back. We've gone through a whole bunch of things along the way, but you've really had now a window from the staff writer position all the way up to running a room and reading scripts, evaluating scripts. You've developed pilots for Hulu, FX, and Amazon, and also you're developing right now for HBO. Talk about your development process. What's your writing habit when you're not on a show, and where do you go for ideas?
Gotcha. Yeah, it's so for ideas, so I like a lot of writers. I mean, I have my own ideas, but also I have things that are brought to me by my representatives. And in a world where the industry is very interested in pre-existing material, IP, books, comic books, that kind of thing, those tend to have a bit more traction. So the pilots that you mentioned, we're all adaptations of various kinds, and and that I think is kind of, at least for me, was a bit of a kind of interesting awakening, because if you'd asked me earlier in my career, like, what do you think about adapting something for TV or features, I'm not sure what I would have said, but I've come to really, really enjoy it, and I've done it a lot. Like I mean, from Handmaids to a bunch of adaptations of the books, comic books, graphic novels, once even like a series of Wired articles. I developed a pilot around that. I really kind of enjoy it, and I think that might go a little bit back to my game design background, where it's kind of a bit of a puzzle. So you look at the book or the play or the comic book, and kind of when you see what is the TV show or what is the movie that's in this thing, like how do you kind of carve away the pieces of the original material and find the best way forward on screen. And I've really kind of enjoyed the kind of the puzzle solving aspect of that. But in terms
and how did you learn that? Was there anywhere where you went to learn that, or was it just kind of winging it with the skills that you'd learned along the way?
I think I think it's kind of a bunch of a bit of winging it, and also really learning from. I mean, I learned a tremendous amount from Handmaids, as I mentioned, from like how we thought about season 1 versus future seasons. But it's also just kind of like having internalized how I at least think about story, and yeah, just sort of seeing like what's missing. I mean, I feel like now at this point, having done this for 15 years, I have a pretty good sense of like, okay, well, a TV show, like here are things that are in this book that like a TV show would need, whether they're there or not, or how do I pull out those things? So, it's a little bit of kind of just experience and practice. I think probably some of my earlier adaptation attempts would not have been great. But in terms of like how I choose to work on it, that's kind of very much a gut feeling. Like I have a couple of kind of pet ideas or areas that I'm always kind of attracted to. I mentioned dystopias, survival stories, frontier stories, exploration stories. I'm really interested in those. But others are just things that like I find something just really compelling about it. Something really kind of just hooks me in. I mean, I have worked a lot in genre. Handmaid's Tale is speculative fiction. It's not sci-fi, but it is speculative fiction. I like things that have interesting worlds. So the stories that I kind of am drawn to either come up out of whole cloth of my own original ideas or to adapt, typically are things that have some really interesting world aspect to it, and that could be sci-fi or fantasy, but also could be historical, or also could be a lens into a world that I just feel like I haven't seen before. I like being transported, like being taken places. And that's kind of like a very large descriptor. So it really is kind of a gut sense when I read a book that's been sent to me, or kind of noodling over my own scribbled idea pads that we all have. Kind of what really gets me excited. What am I excited to dive into?
Very cool. And in terms of when you're in a hiring position, reading scripts. When you're evaluating writers, what are you looking for on the page? Do's and don'ts, things that really stand out to you in a positive or negative way.
Yeah, so having read for staffing for Demimonde and also for Handmaids and other shows, yeah, there are definitely things that I kind of look for. Some things kind of more mindfully than others. So I am definitely one of those folks who will look at the length of a script before I read it. I mean, it will not stop me from starting to read it, but I will be like, oh, okay, so this is supposed to be a 1-hour drama and it's like 66 pages. Like, okay, it's a little iffy. I also will flip through it. I'll flip through it to sort of see, does it look like a script? I mean, sometimes you can tell if someone's a little earlier in their career because they have giant chunks of action line or giant monologues, and sometimes that's a stylistic choice. So again, neither of those things are deal breakers, but it is something I kind of clock in my head, especially if I'm reading for a show where I know the house style is more spare. Yeah. That could be not necessarily a red flag, but like just something to keep in mind. And then really, what I'm looking for when I'm reading is I really want to be made to feel something. I really want to connect to the characters. I really want to kind of feel for them. And I sometimes will read, sometimes even scripts from established writers, where the script comes off as a little bit more of a narration of events rather than like kind of getting under the skin of a character and kind of, where's their head at when these things are happening. So really kind of being drawn into a story through an emotional connection is like kind of the first and foremost thing I'm looking for. And you can tell that pretty quickly. You can tell that in the first handful of pages for sure. Yeah. And then more broadly, I just want to feel like, and this is true. I think this is true for anybody at any level being read, is you just want to feel like you're in good hands, like you're in confident hands with the storyteller. Like the storyteller has full command, the writer has full command of their script and their story, and they're kind of just bringing you along. You want something that comes across as confident. That gets to voice, and everyone's voice on the page is going to be different, so everyone needs to kind of find their own style and voice. But I would much rather read something that has like a quirky but definitive means of expression than something that's just like, this happened, then this happened, this happened, this person does this, this person does that. Yeah,
definitely. You hear this at panels a lot, that you really have to write at least 10 scripts before you have a good one. Do you believe that?
Oh, I don't know about the number. I think it depends on the person. But yeah, definitely your first scripts are not going to be any good. I mean, you might get the occasional like genius or prodigy where they are great out of the gate, but I certainly wrote some like terrible initial scripts. And you just kind of get out. You just need to get past them and also understand why they're not great. Like that's probably the more important thing. Not than the number is like, okay, is this working? If not, why not? And that can be hard, especially early in your career where you may not have more than like your writing group to swap scripts with, or your writing class folks that I mentioned earlier. But that feedback's really important, not for identifying what's working and what's not working, but because when you're working on your own script, you're so close to it that you will absolutely miss things. And so that external read, everybody at every level, even at the highest level, always has someone read their stuff. Just because we're in it so deeply that we can't see. If this if it's a mystery, is the clue trail too obvious? Is the clue trail too obscure? If it's a big world building show, is it too confusing? Are people's eyes glazing over because you're getting into like the family tree of this royal family or that kind of thing? And that's something that you just not get, because it's in our heads. We do a lot of as writers, we're connecting the dots, kind of like definitely in our heads, not necessarily on the page, and that's where the external read is super, super important.
Yeah. And what about interviews? When you're doing interviews with people, how can somebody really stand out in a good or bad way?
Yeah, that gets back to the thing I was mentioning earlier about like the kind of the alchemy of putting together a staff. So sometimes, and this is kind of this, I remember finding this kind of like hard to hear when someone's told it to me. It's like sometimes the getting the job off of the showrunner's meeting or not may have nothing really to do with you at all, because the showrunner or whoever is helping them read is kind of looking at the whole picture of the staff, and they just might have somebody else that's kind of in the slot in terms of level wise or experience wise, or kind of the type of writer you are wise, that may already be covered. Or like I said, like you don't want a room of like 10 people who break story like I do would be terrible, because no one would say anything for the longest time. So you need a mix of that. So that's part of the putting together the baseball team or whatever your analogy is. So part of it is that. Part of it's me thinking about the other folks that I've read and personalities and experiences that I'm already starting to try to assemble, and where you the writer might kind of fit into that. It's really kind of a vibey thing. You want to get a sense that this is someone, just quite simply, that you can kind of hang with and break story with for hours at a time. And sometimes people's energy will not be a good fit for the room. And again, there's nothing against them as people, but again, the showrunner's looking at this person plus that person plus the other three people I'm talking about. Like, how's that blend of energy going to go? So I would say you don't want to not be yourself. Like, it's because that also comes across if people are kind of trying to be on. You need to be true to yourself in a meeting, even if you are kind of a shyer person and meetings are difficult. That certainly is the case with me, and certainly was the case when I was getting started. You need to be authentic, because they want to know who you really are. So I'm trying to get a sense of that, and also just kind of like it's just the kind of person you are. Like that's where the kind of shooting the breeze in a meeting is good, because I want to know where where are you from, and how'd you become a writer, and why are you a writer? What kind of stories do you like to write? It's helpful if you have like a writing superpower. If you're not asked about that, to maybe sort of say, well, something I really think I bring to a room is X, because that's always really good to know. I mean, and it shows not only that you perhaps have that skill, but you have the own awareness. That awareness of your own process, which is also kind of instructive. So I, as a showrunner, can be like, oh, okay, so here's someone who is a writer. Obviously, if I'm talking with you, I liked your script. But they also are thoughtful about how they work on story, which I know it just speaks to a level of professionalism and discipline that is always a good sign in a writer.
Very, very cool. So the industry has changed a tremendous amount since you first got on staff. 2006, 2007-ish to now. It was announced fairly recently that streaming numbers have overtaken cable, and I don't think it's going backwards. So what would your advice be to someone who wants to break in today's landscape?
Wow. Yeah. So you're exactly right. It's changed a lot very quickly, even in the last, honestly, since 2020. I mean, the pandemic has really changed a lot of things that may not change back. Just the advent of streaming, and then the contraction that's happened this year with streaming. We mentioned the merger, and some of the business aspects of it have trickled down to how creatives like us kind of do our job. It's kind of always been a hard business. I think patience and persistence and resilience are those are never not in fashion. Those are always useful traits for writers. I'm just working on your material. Sometimes we have control over very little as writers. We lose jobs for reasons we don't understand. Our show gets canceled for reasons we don't understand. And none of that, basically none of that's really in our control. What is under our control is what we write. So, as the business is kind of chaotic around us, just really focusing on just writing an amazing script, and then writing another one and writing another one, knowing that at some point someone will say, "Oh, hey, what are you working on?" Or, "Oh, hey, my roommate is a new agent, newly minted agent over at agency X or whatever." Someone will ask to read your material, and that is what happened with me with my friend for that pilot that I wrote. And I had just taken the time to get it as bulletproof as I could as a writing sample, that someone responded to it, and that kind of I still get meetings off of that. So it sounds really obvious, but focusing on the material is really key. I would really encourage writers of all levels. I mentioned this before as well, is to develop like a cohort, whether it's through a writing class or a Facebook group. Or just a free-form writing group, people whose taste and feedback you respect and kind of get and click with, because those people will be gold as you kind of make your way through your career, because you'll that accountability to get things done. You learn how to give notes and how to get notes, which is insanely valuable, because that's going to be a huge part of your job as a TV writer is getting notes and giving notes. And also just the support, because it can be a very difficult, isolating industry, especially these days. So having people, even if you're getting together, virtually, once a month or whatever, is important just for that support network, because especially if people that are kind of your similar level, you'll be going through the same sorts of things. So, you can lift each other up and support each other when things are going badly, and you can vent to each other when you didn't get the meeting or the job or whatever that you're hoping for. That's kind of evergreen stuff. In this day, in this day and age, also there is more opportunities to kind of make a splash and get known out there. In other ways. So, whether it's a web series or a short film, the Twitter threads, podcasts, scripted podcasts, all of these are ways to kind of get your voice and your storytelling kind of out there that people can see, in addition to whatever script you might be writing. I am not a director, but if I was, I would absolutely be trying to make things on my iPhone and things like that. So there's definitely no one path. And I'm sure as you know from all your many, many interviews, pretty much everyone has a really different story on how they got into the business, which is both the good news and the bad news. It's, the good news is that, hey, there's no one way. The bad news is there's no one sure way. It would be nice if there's a really clear path. It's
army family to video game designer to.
Exactly. It's a very much of a ping pong thing, and that's true for a lot of people. But it's the fact that I came to it kind of as a second career, even a third career if you count my brief stint in theater. It's apart from that learning curve, it never really it didn't really hold me back at all. And the fact that I had this other life experience, sometimes it was really useful in the room because I could speak to a lot of, tech. It was great for Eureka because I could speak to a lot of technology things. We did a whole, a season about VR, which was drawn very much from my experience working in computer games. Not just mine, obviously, but I was, definitely a source for a lot of that detail. So yeah, that's the other thing also is to kind of lean into what makes you unique as a writer, as a person. That's something that would, also I would absolutely ask about in meetings is, like when some people say like, tell me about yourself, like they're looking for like, what makes you cool and interesting and memorable. And, and that voice, like, your creativity, absolutely come across. And that's something that, again, is, no matter when you're trying to break in, and it is, I think, harder now than it has ever been. That's something that will always be true.
Very, very cool. Well, we've gone a little bit long here, but I really appreciate you being so generous with your time. Social media handles, how do you like to interact with people?
So we're in a weird time right now. I'm not sure what's going on with Twitter. I'm still on Twitter for the time being. I don't tweet that often. It's mostly cat pictures on Saturdays. But I am at Sugar Jones, Jonze at Sugar Jones on Twitter, and that's kind of where I am right now. I haven't quite decided if I want to go elsewhere or add something, but that's where you can find me for now. And if I do move on, I will certainly announce it there. So yeah,
very, very cool. And it's funny because I saw you on Twitter for the longest time, and I didn't connect that it was you. I always saw Sugar Jones on the script chats and things like that, and it was anyway.
Yeah, that's
I know it's
me.
you.
Yeah, that's on me because I've had that handle for because I was kind of a little more OG internet. Like I've had that handle for a long, long time. I probably should have just used my name. It would have avoided a lot of frustration. But this was so much fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for, like I said, being very, very generous with your time. I'll stay on just for a second after we go off here. But wow, awesome stuff. Really appreciate not just today, but the panels that you've been on and the way that you've given to so many and given so much great advice, which I'm sure has been helpful to help people to break in and to excel in this industry.
So certainly good luck to everyone out there on everything, and persistence and resilience. So they'll carry you a long way, I promise.
That's it for the episode. You can find us on the web at tvwriterpodcast.com or at scriptmag.com. The video version of this podcast is available at iTunes, Podbean, or YouTube. The audio-only version is available at iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, or Pandora. You can find me on Instagram at tvwriterpodcast. Follow me on Twitter, @GrayJones is my handle. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.